listener production.
Hey, Antoinette Lattouf here with the weekend briefing. A human exclamation mark is the best way I can describe my guest today. He's the zany science communicator with the colourful shirts who has a passion for informing the masses and also a passion for squatting, I came to learn, which we will get into. Dr. Karl is a former taxi driver. He was a serial university student studying for 16 years and is now a much-loved medical personality on radio and TV who's just written a memoir, The Periodic Tale. And my jaw dropped at so many points reading this book, from his family's traumatic journey and Holocaust survival to how he almost died after getting dragged from a car and beat up in Sydney, right through to his latest TikTok adventures. One thing's for sure, and it's that Dr. Karl is not slowing down. Later in the show, my producer extraordinaire, Helen Smith, will join me, so we'll bring you the weekend list, and that's where we recommend things to do and watch and eat and see and everything in between. But first, here's my chat with Dr. Karl. Dr. Karl, welcome to the weekend briefing. I have so much I want to ask you because I devoured your book, The Periodic Tale, and I don't often give compliments easily. And I don't do it to try and humble you or charm you. I would otherwise just say, oh, you've written a book.
Have you? And you've done a trick of when it's boring, you read the first and last chapter of each paragraph and then you just whiz through it and then you got a little... I've done that.
The Cliff's Notes, or you read a review online. No, I read it all and we're going to get into the book.
Sweet.
But what I found really interesting, and perhaps I didn't know too much about you, was your early life and your parents' journey and the amount of trauma they experienced. I guess what I got from that was that your parents reacted to their trauma in different ways, and it's perhaps your father's. You speak very fondly of your father's optimism that you inherited. What can you quickly tell us? I know it's a very long and complicated and layered story about your parents' journey to Australia.
Okay, well, firstly, the optimism, we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah.
It turns out that in general, you're better off being optimistic than not optimistic. All the psychology studies show that. And there was one period in my life when my father was very unhappy. He was in a German concentration camp. He was going to be killed. His job was carrying dead Jews from one place to another. And there was this guy who was carrying so he could be then burnt. And the guy's head was on his shoulders and sort of going left, right, left, right. This is a fairly heavy, dark start to it, but it'll be optimistic anyway. And so suddenly he thought, gee, there's not much point living here. They're going to kill me anyway, like this guy is already dead, who is freshly killed half an hour ago. And then suddenly he heard this cuckoo in his head going, cuckoo, as the guy's head went left, right, and he started laughing, and that gave him an optimistic point of view. And so optimism will get you out of places. I also get that from my book where I get all my moral values from, The Godfather by Mario Puzo.
Yeah.
And they got that phrase, it is what it is. And so you might be in the family as a gang member, and then one of your mates has done something bad and you're going to get killed, and you think that's terrible, and then you just have to think it is what it is. There are some things you can change and some things you can't. You can always change yourself. At the very worst, at the very least, you can always change yourself and your attitude, and it might be false optimism, but it gets you out of a bad situation.
Do you think that was optimism then in that moment? Because I remember reading that part of that book, and your father started to laugh.
Yeah.
At what is unspeakable horrors.
Unspeakable. I mean, imagine your job is carrying dead people around,
right,
who have just been killed by the Nazis, and you're going to get killed. But he wanted to survive, and here I am. And so I've been optimistic, and it's helped me. So with regard to my father and my parents, my father went through terrible things in the war. And
what was interesting, I found, was your father is a Catholic and a strict, quite an observant Catholic. Yeah. But he was punished for a whole bunch of reasons based on his political views and his allegiances or trying to help or support Jewish people. Yeah. But your mother was Jewish. You didn't realise that she was Jewish until
she lied to me.
Because she hid it until her dementia, in which she started to share her childhood.
You have read my book and you'll get a 10 out of 10. Yeah, it was really weird. I kind of learned a little bit of this when I was a medical doctor, how people deal with terrible trauma. And I was, as a junior medical doctor, dealing with people from the Vietnam War and the First World War, even the First World War. But anyway, so my father dealt with it just by being honest and by being optimistic. My mother dealt with it by lying. which I can understand.
Yeah.
If you've been through unspeakable horrors, maybe you have to create a new psyche in your brain. So she lied about her name, her age, her family, where she was born, her religion, and that sort of got her through life. And, mate, if you can get you through life, I'm sort of sympathetic to that.
And you could, I guess, empathise or understand, given who she was. Her very identity was the reason she was so unsafe.
Sure.
And the attractiveness or the appeal of creating an alternative identity to start a new life.
Sure.
I mean, it's awful.
It's awful. Well, it's happening today. There's still refugees happening in the world. But I'm optimistic. I've read the book The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. That's a hard one to read, 1,000 pages. But basically he shows that in the big stuff like the wars and the small stuff like person-to-person violence, which is not small if it happens to you, but compared to a war, it is small. He said everything is getting better. We are in the most peaceful time ever in human history. So there are something optimistic and homework for our readers.
Another thing I found interesting, which people who see you, obviously on all the platforms available to them, communicating very much a confident communicator, was to learn that you were a bit of a loner at school.
I was, and I was very shy. And the thing that actually stopped me being shy was a combination of being a drug-crazed hippie and a taxi driver.
We're going to get to the drugs and the taxis soon, because I loved getting to know hippie Dr. Karl. And there is one picture in the book where you've got a big beard, and I'm like, not only hippie Dr. Karl, but smouldering hot Dr. Karl.
That is true.
That is true. I love that. You acknowledge it.
We briefly go through that phase, and then I'm now at the stage of life where I look like a badly packed sack of potatoes. But inside I still feel like I'm me. You're
wearing glasses, and you started to wear glasses at a young age because you believe it was because you were reading too much in low light. That's when I started wearing glasses. I was a voracious reader. My parents would tell me to take the light off, and so I'd have a little torch.
I did that.
And I'd be reading because I'm like, go to bed, Antoinette. Now there's a lot of young people having short-sightedness, but it's not because of books, myopia because of iPads and whatnot.
And focusing for long times at close distance,
close range.
In poor light.
Yes.
So if you've got bright light, then the iris at the front of your eye closes down and the image is in focus in depth all across your retina. But if you're in poor light, it's only in focus in the fovea. So just a bit of anatomy here. You've got two eyeballs, each about 24 millimetres in diameter. On the inside is a layer 1/3 of a millimetre thick, and it turns light into electricity. So you've got this big globe, 24 millimetres in diameter, and then there's a tiny bit that is sunken. It's actually further back from the front, and that's the fovea. And half of all the information that gets sent to the brain comes from that area where the cells are extra small, so they've got high resolution. So if you want to look at something like reading something, your eyeball swivels and you make the image land on the fovea. And in poor light, it's in focus on the fovea, but not the rest of the retina, and so the rest of the retina tries to grow bigger to compensate. We've got the situation now that in Taiwan, in the high schools, 80% of all the students have to wear glasses because they're reading in poor light. So if you are going to spend a lot of time on your iPad, at least have the volume up to full. Okay, have it as bright as possible.
Right, okay, so what you and I experienced, what we did to our eyes by our consumption patterns as children, is it similar to what's happening with kids with their iPads, or is that different anatomically?
If the light level is low, it's similar to what we did. If the iPad or the phone is really bright, then the iris closes down and the image has a greater depth of field. So it is happening, unfortunately.
From your school days, you spoke a lot about university as well, where you were well into student activism. You took on a lot of causes.
So many,
much to the dismay of your father, who wanted you to get on and just get your career sorted.
And get good marks, which I did not do the first time around at university.
Well, you had many times at university, and we will get to that as well because it was free university degrees back then. What do you make now of student activism? Because for a long time it has been the students, be it the Vietnam War, or now climate change. What do you make of the latest wave of student activism? Because it's included encampments, it's included mass protests orchestrated simultaneously around the world for climate change. Are you proud of the kids? Would you have joined them?
I have joined them. Yeah, it's like a pendulum. It goes backwards and forwards. There's so many pendulum-type-like activities in human behaviour, and so for a while there were very few protests at universities among university students, and now they're coming back again. The only thing is that it has to be peaceful because you can't hurt or harm another person. Because one thing I learned from being beaten unconscious as a taxi driver is you don't want to hurt another person in your protest. So so the best thing to do is that you do classes on how to go floppy, and then the cops have to pick you up like you're a bit of well-boiled spaghetti. You do not fight, you do not kick them, you don't throw anything at them. You just say, I protest, I have the right to protest peacefully, and then suddenly there's 50,000 people joining you.
Yeah.
And so there's that story which I didn't mention of Nixon was wanting to drop bombs on nuclear weapons on Vietnam. And what happened was that there was this huge peaceful protest where a couple of million people went to Washington, walked around in circles in the middle of Christmas, got beaten up by the cops, got their fair share of abuse, went home and thought they'd failed. But Nixon looked out the window and was so impressed by it that he decided not to drop nuclear bombs on Vietnam. So protesting is good.
It's getting harder to protest now. There are more anti-protest laws. So
yes,
the freedom to
peaceful protest.
even against peaceful protesters.
Yeah, that's very wrong.
Yeah.
Very wrong. But it's also very wrong that people have to pay for their education. By the way, here's some advice for the listeners. If you want a free education, either as a plumber or a philosopher, go to Europe. My brother-in-law got a master's degree taught in English in Germany. And if you want to get extra, go to Denmark, where they'll give you free money to rent a flat and buy a bicycle, as well as get a free education in anything you want in English, because they reckon that an extra educated person in the world is a good thing.
And Denmark is willing to fund an Aussie doing it.
Yeah. I've got a few Aussie mates who are doing it. And you get a bicycle. You can buy a bicycle.
I love that you can get a bicycle.
It's amazing.
To sweeten the deal.
Oh, mate. The bicycles have got right of way all across Copenhagen. It's a lovely city.
Well, you studied for 16 years at university.
Yeah. Thank you, taxpayers of Australia. I'm trying to pay it back now.
Oh,
While paying taxes and other things.
That's amazing.
Well, I always put my hand up in the aeroplane if they say, is there a medical doctor on the plane?
Yes.
And I normally get one every year. My record was when I did 142 flights in 1999, and I had 5 medical emergencies to deal with, and 4 of them lived and only 1 died. So that was not too bad, except for that person who died.
Well, I mean, but you also point out in the book that there are some medical practitioners who, when they're off, they're on holiday mode and they're reluctant to put their hand up and help, but you're always...
I think you've got a duty to society.
Yes.
Like, I see myself as having I have benefited from society, so it's my duty to give back. So I do free science Q&As with students. So if you go to drkarl.com, you can make a booking. And so I do schools all around Australia every Wednesday afternoon. And I've been doing it for about 10 years. At the rate I'm going, I reckon in another 85 years, I will have done every school in Australia.
Oh, well, I hope you live for another 85 years.
I hope the medical treatments come online.
What I found also quite interesting is many people came to know you later in your career after you'd been a medical doctor for some years and then you became a science communicator. What I really enjoyed learning about was the few career flops that you had.
I failed so many times.
I love that. I got immense enjoyment, Dr. Karl.
Oh, my God. It was good to write about it then.
Because I was just like, well, because you don't often know that about people. You don't know that they tried their hand at this and it didn't work. They tried their hand at this. You've been fired. You've walked away from jobs. You've had changes of hearts. There was one letter that you received from your dad when you came to study medicine, and you were in your early 30s. You say you were 33 years old. You had 33 cents in the bank to study medicine. And your letter from your dad, I think anyone with an ethnic parent or a migrant parent can empathise with, because it was pretty much like, get your life together, Karl. What the hell are you doing? You're wasting your time. This is a bad idea. It's going to be a flop. Grow up.
He was factually correct, but he was wrong on the fact that you can still have a happy life and turn out okay, even if you have a very diverse path through life. He himself was being a bit of a hypocrite because he actually wrote the script for the first Three Musketeers movie in Hollywood as a silent movie, and yet here he is telling me to stick to one thing, but he drifted through a whole bunch of things, although war does that as well.
And he didn't get to live to see you graduate as a medical doctor.
No, nor get vaguely successful where I'm now micro-famous in Australia.
Oh, I think you're more than vaguely successful.
But I failed at something. I failed at being a politician in 2007. I left that out of the autobiography.
You failed at being a weather person, a weatherman?
I foolishly insisted that meat had fat in it, so they fired me for that. I failed being a physicist at the Steelworks because I said that the steel on the Westgate Bridge wasn't strong enough and it fell over, but for different reasons. And I failed being an academic in New Guinea because I wouldn't fake the PhD for my boss. And I failed at building my anti-gravity machine. That didn't work either. I left that out of the book. There was just too much. I did succeed in being a test driver for four-wheel drives. That was so much fun for 2.5 decades. And I've spent a total of 2 years sleeping under the stars in the outback, which was just gorgeous.
What do you think it is about your attitude or your personality that you've been able to turn those failures into the next step? Because many people would be pretty overwhelmed by those failures.
Well, looking back on it, I was reading it and I suddenly realised that there were 3 things. And it's handy because everything comes in 3. So, there's always 3 people in a joke. An imam, a rabbi and a priest all walk into a bar, 1, 2, bang, bang, 3. So there's always 3. There's never 2, there's never 4. And there's 3 days of the week, according to the country and western songs, each one worse than the day before. And so the 3 things I've got are the optimism, which I talked about. It is what it is. You can always change yourself. The second one is curiosity. Because if you're curious, you say, what's that over there? And you go and have a look. It might open up a whole new path. And then the last one after curiosity and optimism is generosity. So people have been very generous to me, not just with money, but with time and with emotions. And part of generosity is being able to forgive people who have done bad things to you and hope that they forgive you. Because we all do stupid things. You mishear somebody. I turned up late today, by the way. Thank you for forgiving me. And so forgiveness and generosity is, I think, the third part of being able to navigate through life and still survive and be happy at the end of it and during it. It's like a roller coaster. You get off where you get on. And what matters is the life in between. So have a good ride.
Have you forgiven the person who dragged you out of your taxi and beat you senseless?
I've never formally thought about it, but yes, I should, because almost certainly things were going on in their life. Like they might have been poorly educated and they could have had bad things happening to them at home and they were part of a group and they were trying to fit into it. So whoever you are, well, there were a couple of them, I hereby officially forgive you for beating me unconscious.
Oh, thank you. You heard it here first with Dr. Karl. Forgiving was it 2 men?
It was a bunch of them. So this woman broke away from the taxi and then all I know is they ripped open my door and then at least 2 of them were kicking me and hitting me. And then as I drifted into unconsciousness, I had this weird thought of, I hope they stop before I die because I've got no control. And luckily I did.
In addition to being a taxi driver for 8 years, I believe, you also squatted. Was it 8 years? Squatted in a house in Glebe.
Yeah. So that was also very lucky. See how lucky you are? So if you're optimistic, lucky things fall your way and you recognise it. So instead of just saying, walking past, I'm not going to pick that up. You pick it up and you think, wow, it's $100 note. So I squatted in a house for Glebe, in Glebe, and it was just wonderful. And I could afford to be a penniless student and find my own way through life again.
Well, that Glebe is back then a rougher but now very trendy inner west suburb of Sydney. There'd be a lot of our listeners going, damn, Dr. Karl, 8 years of no rent and 16 years of no hex.
And free electricity too. I learned that when I was...
You're just putting salt in the wounds now, Dr. Karl.
Yeah. You put on rubber gloves, mate, and you bypass the meter.
Okay.
Don't do this. Do not do this.
And there were so many moments of like either illegal activity. Like
illegal.
Speeding over the Harbour Bridge or getting from Manly to Parramatta.
Hang on. City to Parramatta was 15. My record was Manly to the city in 10, but I had a mate who could do it in 8.
Yes. So there's lots of times where you're like, don't do this at home.
Don't do this at home.
This is illegal.
This is stupid. Yeah.
Stupid and illegal.
Okay. If you don't make a mistake, you don't make anything, but try not to make the same mistake over and over.
Right.
And
you also reference a lot of smoking weed.
I did.
But you point out that you were glad that you smoked a lot of weed after your brain was fully formed.
I was just so lucky again. And also I didn't get busted because I could have ended up being busted and then sharing a cell with a large hairy man with love and hate tattooed on their knuckles and going down a pathway where I would not be allowed into Europe or the USA or the United Kingdom because of my criminal record. So I was very lucky. And so I'd say here, be legal. But with dope... some people have got a propensity for having schizophrenia if they smoke dope, and luckily I wasn't. And if that happens to you, just give it up straight away. And also, don't do anything illegal. I was stupid. Yeah, another stupid thing.
What do you make of where the conversation and legislation is up to in terms of cannabis use in Australia? And I know it's been a bit easier with medicinal cannabis,
sure,
but it's still quite tightly controlled compared to Europe and the United States.
Well, I was in New York recently visiting my daughter and her baby, and we were walking past the theatre late one night, and there were 2 little old ladies in their 70s sharing a joint together out the front. And I asked the cops about it. Wherever I went, I was always asking the cops. I said, what's the difference now that marijuana is totally legal and you can smoke it anywhere, anytime, in the same way you can drink alcohol? And they said, the big difference is there's hardly any fights anymore.
Right.
So people come out of a sports arena and you bumped into me. I want to kill you because I've been drinking beer, been smoking dope. I'm still confused, but hey, peace, love, my man.
Yeah.
So it seems to be virtually identical. And in Australia, we have the thing that alcohol is related to violence.
Yes.
And a few women get killed every week, almost overwhelmingly because of domestic violence with the partner they know, and alcohol is involved, and they get killed. A few women get killed every week. And we don't have a few guys getting killed by the women every week. So the alcohol is bad that way, but I'm sure that dope leaves you fuzzy, and I'm sure I spent a lot of time being fuzzy. Like that helped me fail at being a filmmaker.
Do you think, though, it should be legalised to the point that, when I was in Greece, you could get it in vending machines.
Sure, and in New York. So I think it should be in the same way legal that alcohol is legal, in that it's a relatively harmless drug, and some people like alcohol, not weed, and other people like weed, not alcohol, and they shouldn't go to jail and have bad things happen to them just because of the temporary fluctuation of where they happen to live in Australia, because they don't live in, South Australia and the ACT.
ACT,
yeah. Okay, right. And it's just ridiculous if you're 1 mile over the border, you get busted and go to jail. That's wrong.
Before writing The Periodic Tale, you'd written 48 books, but this is your autobiography.
Oh, sorry, this is 48. I'd written 47 before. Yep, that's right.
My bad, 47. This is your 48th. How did it differ, writing your own story compared to writing all of those other books?
It was terrible. I hated it because I felt very shy talking about myself. I'm very fine saying to you, hey, did you know that if you paint your skin with concentrated food dye, you can see through your skin?
Yeah, okay.
Or you can make the world's best microphone out of spider web, or all black holes have the same diameter, which is 0. Trees talk to each other via an underground network we call the Wood Wide Web. That's fine. But if I say, hey, here's a book written by me, about me, filtered through my mind, telling you how wonderful I am, written by me, and by the way, you have to pay to get it, and I'll give you an exam, and I expect you to get 85% correct on it. I feel awkward.
How am I doing, though? Because I've gotten a lot correct.
Mate, you're up in the 99.
Excellent. Right, where I deserve to be.
Where you deserve to be. Yeah. I feel awkward. And so instead of writing at least 1 book a year, it took 3 years because I was just awfully embarrassed writing about myself. And so I spent a lot of time reading other autobiographies, trying not to make the mistakes that they didn't, try to make it interesting with interesting stories and a moral message, which is to be kind, be generous, be optimistic, be curious.
You do use a lot of exclamation marks in the book. That's something I noted. And ordinarily I would be like, that is an abuse of punctuation. However, I think you embody a human exclamation mark. So
that's so kind.
I accepted it. I was like, you know what, for anybody, and sometimes it was like in places where it was like, and it's terrible because somebody was going, and it'd be something traumatic about your father escaping, like his 5 experiences of escaping death or a prison or getting out of a prison dressed as a German soldier, taking on his uniform. And you'd use exclamation marks where sometimes I'm like, a little bit like inappropriate in that this is really, really, really awful, but you can feel your enthusiasm. And I'm just like, you're the only person I would allow to use that many exclamation marks in a book.
Oh my God, I think that should be a T-shirt, human exclamation mark, or maybe the name of a band.
I think you are a human exclamation mark.
Oh,
and so I mean, I was counting at one point, but there were hundreds and hundreds of use of the exclamation mark.
I tried to put in leading caps, which I like using, a very Victorian thing, but they got rid of those. And they use the word only in the wrong place all the time. You can't help that.
Give me an example.
Only press the button in an emergency.
Yes.
Does that mean that you should stop breathing? What they should say is press this button only in an emergency. And look, the trouble is I'm too literal.
Yes.
And so we had a waiter the other day who said, if you need anything, my name's Scott. I was thinking to myself, really? I haven't met many people with conditional names, so if we don't need you, you have a different name? Is that what you're saying? But the trouble is we don't teach grammar in schools anymore, and which is weird because my daughter had a friend who was brilliant at high school and came top in school and everything, and then came top in English, then went to Italy and on a school exchange and failed English.
Oh, wow.
Because she didn't know any grammar.
Right.
In many cases, they don't say what they think, and grammar forces you to say what you think. But that's just me being grumpy. Grumpy.
When you walked in, you shared an interesting statistic about, but this was before we started recording, how much of the information is accurate when it comes to medicine on TikTok.
On TikTok, it's 2% accurate, which is why I went on to TikTok to try and make it higher. So part of the motivation was that in the early days of COVID, 85% of females aged 13 to 19 would be told lies about COVID virus and COVID vaccine in their first half hour on TikTok. And the other social media. Nothing personal. They're all the same.
Okay, and what do you find the engagement like? Did you respond to them? Do you read their comments?
Sure, yeah. And I have sympathy for them because they've been lied to. So in some of the states of Australia, the only media you get is the Murdoch media, which has got a very weird line about climate change. And so that's Tasmania, Adelaide, South Australia and Queensland. And if somebody's been lied to for 33 years, which is how long the fossil fuel companies have been lying to us about climate change, they think, well, I've been reading this for 33 years. It must be true. And they don't know they've been lied to. So I'm trying to give them the hard facts.
What's next for you, Dr. Karl? You've done so many different things.
Believe it or not, I have worked on a way to save the world based on OnlyFans.
What? What?
I have worked out a way to make the world a better place,
based on
OnlyFans, full stop. So if you're a male, right, on OnlyFans, and you pay $10 a month to see Jacinta show bits of her flesh, and then you're really bored at 2 o'clock in the morning, and so you type in, "Hey Jacinta, I want to see more," instantly you get a reply. That reply is not from Jacinta. It's from a human, usually from Venezuela or Philippines, because those countries have got people who are prepared to work for $5 an hour because they're so poor and have got good English. And then Jacinta says...
Is this a long way of telling me you're going on OnlyFans?
I know, but the point is they get an instant response.
Yes.
Now, I'm only me. And if somebody says something, wants to know a bit about climate change, I can't be there at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I am trying to devise an AI that will be honest and reasonable based on the psychology of the person who will respond to them 24 hours a day, specifically in the area of climate change. I did my first story on climate change, I'm guessing before you were born, in 1981.
Before I was born, well
yes,
done.
I was saying there's this thing called climate change, or it's called the greenhouse effect, and the insurance companies think that it's real and they're charging more. The fossil fuel companies are investigating it, and the scientists don't know yet. And bad things would happen, I'll keep you informed.
Okay.
That was in 1981 I said that story. So I've been following on that for a long time. So I'm trying to work with people to devise a bot that, following the example of OnlyFans, will be there 24 hours a day. It won't sell you videos of them losing their bikini in the shower.
I'm going to reduce this to a headline because that's what journalists do.
Hooray.
OnlyFans is going to solve climate change.
Right on, sister.
Love it. Thanks for your time. It's been fabulous chatting with you.
You're also fabulous too.
Dr. Karl's book, The Periodic Tale, which I can highly recommend, is available at all bookstores. It's your favourite time of the week because it is the weekend list, and that is where my fabulous producer and friend Helen Smith joins me to share what she has been consuming and watching and listening to, and boils it down to 2 recommendations. What do you have this week, Helen?
My first recommendation is a Netflix TV show. Now, you've probably seen this floating around. It's called Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story.
Yeah.
And so it's about these Menendez brothers who killed their parents, and it is based on real life. So these 2 brothers, they're both still alive. They're both in prison. To this day, they were sentenced with life without parole, and it follows their story. But it has come under some fire and criticism for the accuracy, the portrayal of the characters, the 2 brothers.
Yeah.
And one of the brothers actually spoke out. Erik spoke out of the portrayal of his brother Lyle because it deals with a lot of heavy themes, as you can imagine. And I'm really enjoying it purely because the actors in this series are amazing. And some of these scenes and how they're shot, and one of the episodes is literally one shot and it zooms in, and that is the whole episode. And I just love that kind of thing because it really just shows the pure skill of the actors. It is the follow-up of the controversy first Monsters series, and that was about Jeffrey Dahmer, which was really criticised for it being insensitive and...
Insensitive to victims?
To the victims and glamorising the murderer.
Yeah.
So, which I think a lot of true crime and crime reenactments do get that criticism.
Yeah, look, true crime is so popular. That's why there are so many podcasts and the streamers can't get enough of it. But, you know, I call it true-ish crime.
Yeah.
Because they take elements of truth and it's dramatization, and then there's the whodunit. And there's always the criticism that it doesn't necessarily elevate the victims enough. And in some ways, some shows can glamorize the perpetrators or glamorize violence. But as long as people keep consuming it the way it is, they're just going to keep making it.
Yeah, and the creator of both of these series, the Monsters series, and it's been renewed for a third season, is Ryan Murphy. So he's the director and writer behind the series, and he's also behind series including like Glee, The Watcher, American Horror Story. So he's done a lot of stuff.
Entertainment though, not
entertainment.
Factual.
Yeah. He's also done Ratched as well and some other true crimey things, but they're to come under fire, but it's entertainment, but at the same time, this is people's lives you're talking about. But I do recommend that, but I say take it with a grain of salt. You know, it's not all fact.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off with a do not watch. Usually we recommend what to do. This is what not to do.
Yeah.
I watched Bad Boys Ride or Die. So that's Bad Boys 4. And I watched it. You can get it on a bunch of streamers where you can just rent it on Apple TV or Binge or Google TV or Samsung. And I got sucked in because of the nostalgia, because I remember the other Bad Boys.
Yeah, which you told me about. And I was like, what? What is this?
You had no idea. And the reason they bring back some of these franchises, and so that was with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, who were sort of in their comedy peak in the late 90s and early 2000s. And there's probably a reason why that was produced and did well then, because the comedy just doesn't work now.
Yeah.
20-something years later.
Oh, it's over. What did we figure out? It's like, it was 1995.
For the first one.
It was like 29 years ago.
Yeah. And so it just doesn't translate. The only saving grace, I would say, is that they still have the same two actors who still do all the stunts and the crime stuff. And they're African-American and have amazing skin and have hardly aged.
They both look amazing.
Yeah,
I was like, hang on, Antoinette, these can't be the same people.
They are the same. They are the same
insane.
people. But sometimes you've just got to accept that it was a goodish thing, a good thing for the times, but it doesn't translate. The other thing that if you are going to check it out just out of curiosity is there's another character in this episode, which is Will Smith's half-son, who is an absolute babe. So if you just want like some, wow, amazing aging genetics, then do it. Otherwise, this is a message to all film producers who think it's a good idea to go back 20 years and recreate it. It often does not work.
Yeah, sometimes just leave it where it is.
Absolutely.
It was fine. It was good back then. My second recommendation is also a watch, but it's on YouTube. So have a little like YouTube look around because it's this new season of Dancing with the Stars, the American version.
Okay.
I think the American version's always better than the Australian because they have huge names on these American versions. One of them is actually, do you remember Anna Delvey?
Yes.
Yeah, she's on it with her ankle bracelet.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's iconic. It's amazing. So she was behind the hit Netflix series, I think it was a few years ago, 2022, Inventing Anna.
She's like a charismatic con artist.
Yes. And I just think this is iconic. I'm also like, yeah, whatever, girl. Like, you just fooled the rich and did all these like crazy things. And she served her time. She's got an ankle bracelet on. She's still doing her thing, but she's on Dancing with the Stars. And I just think it's amazing. She's not a very great dancer, but she's kind of just there. And I'm like, I love that.
Oh my gosh.
But my favorite dancer who's really good, he is the US gymnast, Stefan Nodorosik, and he went viral during the Paris Olympics because his only event is the pummel horse. So everyone's calling him the pummel horse guy, and it's that big kind of block that they spin around on their hands.
Oh, yeah.
And he did a great job, and he's just this gymnast nerd, and he can finish a Rubik's Cube in like under a few minutes, and he was doing the Rubik's Cube like at the Olympics, and everyone just was like, who is this guy? He just is living he's in his own world. And he is really, really good in Dancing with the Stars. And
is he a good dancer?
Yes.
Oh, that's cute.
Like, look, you know, when they're dancing, besides the professionals, though, you're always like, oh, they're not a professional.
Yeah.
But the energy is there. The high kicks are there. So I'm like, you know what? you go. This is great. But if you want a bit of fun and bit of like dance, I think it's just so good. Some of them are terrible though.
Yeah, I'll check that out only because I love Anna Delvey and I love her story.
Yeah.
My final recommendation is a book by Sara Haddad. She's an Australian author. It's called The Songbird. It's actually a short story. And it's a story of millions of people who just want to go home. And it's a story about the character Nabila Yasmin, who is a girl who experienced the horrors of the Nakba in Palestine. And it provides this brief factual history of Palestine. And so you meet Nabila as a young child in Palestine in 1947 and then also as an older woman in Australia in 2023. It is a beautiful, touching read. Bruce Pascoe has called it delicately wrought. And I highly recommend, if you want to understand Palestinian history a little bit better through the eyes of an Australian author, then check out Sara Haddad's The Songbird. That's it for this week. Thank you so much for being with us and tuning in. It is always such a pleasure to hang out with you. And if you want more of the Weekend Briefing, you can find us on the Listener app. Download the Listener app in the App Store. Follow us there. Otherwise, you can follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And why not give us a rating and share your thoughts on this amazing chat with the brilliant Dr. Karl. I had so much fun chatting to him after reading his book. Also highly recommend reading his memoir. And you can rate and review every episode if you're feeling super generous. We'll be back on Monday where the team will have the latest headlines straight to your headphones along with some interesting interviews. Stay safe, everyone. Catch you next week.
Listener.